The air in the room went thin, like all the oxygen had been sucked out by a silent, invisible vacuum. It was a Tuesday. I remember that much, the kind of gray, unremarkable Tuesday that should have been swallowed by the calendar without a trace. He was standing by the window, the one that overlooked the garden I'd spent years cultivating, the one where we'd planned to build a small fountain one day. His back was to me. He didn't turn around when he said it. The words were quiet, too quiet for the devastation they carried. Just, I want a divorce. No preamble. No fight. No crescendo of an argument built over weeks or months. Just the flat, final declaration, delivered like a weather forecast for the end of the world. My hands, which had been loosely clasped in front of me, felt suddenly alien, cold and heavy. They trembled. I looked down at them, as if they belonged to someone else.
Divorce.
The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It didn't seem possible. Not after everything. Not after the last few frantic months. Not after I'd laid myself bare, not just emotionally, but financially, to pull him back from the brink. My throat closed up. I tried to speak, but only a small, broken sound escaped. He still didn't turn. He just kept staring out the window, at the garden, at the empty space where the fountain was supposed to be. Where are you listening from, and what time is it? If you've ever felt like the rug was pulled out from under you, tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the world fractured, life was comfortable, safe. It had a polished gleam that spoke of stability, of things built to last. We lived in a beautiful house, not ostentatious, but elegant, settled into a neighborhood of mature trees and quiet streets. There were Sunday morning papers and coffee on the porch, the smell of blooming jasmine in the spring, the comfortable weight of routine. I had built my own life long before he became a central figure in it. I had my career, a steady, fulfilling path that gave me independence. And I had my inheritance, or more accurately, the estate that had been placed into a trust for me years ago. It wasn't just money. It was a legacy, a shield, a quiet promise of security whispered by generations before me. $85 million. A number I rarely thought about in concrete terms, more like a distant, reassuring star in the financial sky. It meant freedom. It meant I never had to stay in a situation I didn't want to be in for money. It meant options. When I met him, he fit into that life seamlessly. He was charming, funny, charismatic.
He made me laugh.
He admired my strength, my independence. Or so I thought. We built a life together, brick by emotional brick. Shared dreams, shared meals, shared silences that felt companionable rather than empty. There were trips, dinners with friends, quiet nights in. It was, on the surface, everything I had wanted. A partnership. A shared journey. I wasn't naive about money and relationships. My own financial independence was paramount to me. We kept our finances largely separate, a system that worked well. My trust was my own, managed by trustees, a distinct entity. Our joint accounts handled household expenses, vacations, the ebb and flow of daily life. His career seemed successful enough, his income sufficient. There were no flashing red lights, no blaring sirens. Just the quiet hum of a life well-ordered. Looking back, the signs were probably there, tiny cracks in the polished surface I chose not to see. Late nights he explained away as working late. A quick flash of tension when I asked about his business trips. A certain evasiveness around financial conversations, which I attributed to him respecting my independent nature. I trusted him. That was the foundation everything was built upon. My trust in him was as deep and solid as the foundations of the old-growth trees outside our window. And like those trees, it felt unshakable. The call came on a Wednesday morning. A voice, calm and professional, but with an undercurrent of something cold and urgent, from a place I didn't recognize. A creditor. They were calling about an outstanding debt. A significant one. My husband's name. My joint address. They were surprisingly direct. The amount made my blood run cold. $270,000. Gambling debt. The words felt like physical blows. Gambling? My husband? The man who seemed so measured, so in control? The man who had always preached caution with money, who gently teased me about my occasional impulse buys. It seemed impossible, surreal, like a character in a bad movie. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the phone. It clattered on the wooden floor, the voice still tinny and distant. I stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs. $270,000.
How?
How could he possibly accumulate that much without me knowing? More importantly, why? When he came home that evening, the air in the house was different. Thicker. Slower. He looked tired, lines etched around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. I didn't ease into it. I couldn't. The number was a live wire humming in my brain. Asked him directly. His face went pale. The carefully constructed mask he wore crumbled in an instant, revealing a raw, panicked fear I had never seen. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The creditor's call had seen to that. The confession spilled out in a torrent of shame, self-pity, and desperate promises. A downward spiral that had started small, a little hobby that got out of control. Chasing losses. Trying to win it back before I found out. It was a story as old as time, as sad as it was infuriating. He looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes, the man I loved reduced to a trembling, exposed mess. He had borrowed from increasingly dangerous sources. The professional voice on the phone was one of the less terrifying ones. There were others. Implied threats. Deadlines. The fear wasn't just about money anymore. It was about his safety. Our safety. The weight of the debt settled on my shoulders, crushing the air from my lungs. $270,000. It wasn't an impossible sum for me, not with my resources, but it was staggering. It was reckless. It was a gaping hole blown in the side of our comfortable ship, and it was his. Entirely his. My immediate reaction wasn't anger. Not at first. It was a cold, visceral fear for him. For us. The threat felt real, tangible. He described men who didn't deal in pleasantries, who collected debts with methods far more persuasive than phone calls. I saw the genuine terror in his eyes. The man I loved was in danger, and I was the only one who could fix it. The decision felt less like a choice and more like a reflex. He was my husband, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. This felt like the poorer part, drastically accelerated and with added criminal undertones. I couldn't leave him exposed to that. I couldn't stand by and watch him be destroyed by his own terrible decisions. So, I set about the grim task of paying it off. It wasn't as simple as writing a single check. The debts were spread across different entities, each requiring careful, separate negotiation. My trustees were consulted, not for the money itself, which was outside the trust, but for advice on the best way to handle such a complex, messy situation involving potentially unsavory characters. They were cautious, their voices measured and grave. This was risky. This was unusual. I had personal savings, investments outside the trust, funds I had accumulated over my career and from other sources. Accessing them meant liquidating positions, incurring penalties, disrupting long-term plans. Each transfer felt like a small death. Watching the numbers shrink in my accounts, the careful cushion I had built over decades slowly eroding. $50,000 here, $80,000 there, another $100,000. Each payment was a piece of my financial future, tossed into the gaping maw of his past mistakes. The process was shrouded in secrecy. He was mortified, begging me not to tell friends, not to tell family. He promised, swore on everything he held dear, that this was a one-time nightmare, that he would never gamble again, that he would make this up to me. He was repentant, seemingly broken. He clung to me, his relief palpable as each debt was cleared. It took several months. Months of hushed phone calls, tense meetings, the constant, gnawing anxiety. My sleep was fractured, filled with anxious dreams. The house, once a sanctuary, felt heavy with the weight of our secret. The air thrummed with unspoken fear and resentment. I never threw the debt in his face, never made him feel smaller than he already did. I thought that was strength.
I thought that was being a good wife.
I thought that was how you got through a crisis together. You handled it, you healed, you moved on. Finally, the last payment was made. A final confirmation call, a receipt of zero balance. It was over. $270,000 gone. Vanished into the ether of his irresponsibility. I hung up the phone, the silence in the room deafening. A fragile sense of relief washed over me, quickly followed by exhaustion, so profound it felt like a physical illness. We had survived. I had saved him. I expected a change in him.
Gratitude, certainly.
A renewed sense of closeness, perhaps, forged in the crucible of shared crisis. A lightness that came from shedding such a heavy burden. But something shifted. The immediate, overwhelming relief on his part seemed to quickly dissipate, replaced by distance. A strange, unsettling detachment. He was no longer the contrite, terrified man who had clung to me. He became withdrawn. Quiet. He started spending more time out of the house again, though he claimed it was work. The late nights returned. The evasiveness returned, deeper this time, coated in a veneer of normalcy that felt utterly fake. He stopped touching me. The casual brush of a hand, the arm around my waist, the simple intimacy of shared space, it evaporated. He was physically present, but emotionally absent. When I tried to talk to him, to ask what was wrong, he would get defensive, irritable. He accused me of nagging, of not trusting him, of bringing up the past. The past I had just paid $270,000 to erase. The house felt colder. Dinners were eaten in silence, the clinking of cutlery unnervingly loud. My carefully tended garden outside the window started to feel less like a place of peace and more like a boundary, a silent witness to the growing chasm between us. The man I had gone to the brink for, the man I had saved from ruin, seemed to resent me for it. Or worse, see me as an obstacle. The strain became unbearable. I walked on eggshells, trying not to trigger his unpredictable moods. I replayed every conversation, searching for clues, for where we had gone wrong after the crisis. It felt like we had survived the shipwreck only for him to decide he didn't like the lifeboat anymore. My efforts to bridge the gap were met with indifference or veiled hostility. The man who had needed me so desperately just months before now acted as if I were an inconvenience. The question mark over his behavior grew heavier, darker. Was it the lingering shame of the debt? Was he depressed? Was he backsliding into old habits? Or was it something else entirely? The thought whispered in the back of my mind, insidious and cold, but I pushed it away. I didn't want to believe the logical conclusion of his detachment. Not after I had sacrificed so much. Then came the Tuesday. The gray, unremarkable Tuesday. The words by the window. I want a divorce. The oxygen left the room again. My hands still trembled. I found my voice, a little stronger this time, though it felt foreign in my mouth. Divorce?
Why? What?
What happened? He turned then. His face was a mask of weary resolve, devoid of warmth, devoid of any recognition of the woman who had stood by him. It's not working anymore, he said. The banality of the phrase in the face of my turmoil was a fresh wound. We've grown apart. We want different things. Different things? Like me wanting a stable, honest partner, and him wanting.
What?
A fresh start, free of the financial mess I had cleaned up, free of the wife who knew his darkest secret. Different things. I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Like me paying off your $270,000 in gambling debt, and you deciding you'd rather just leave? He flinched. The mask cracked for just a second, revealing a flicker of something, guilt? Annoyance? Before snapping back into place. That's unfair, he said, his voice hardening. This isn't about the debt. This is about us. We're incompatible. I haven't been happy for a long time. The coldness in his voice was shocking. He was rewriting our history, erasing the crisis we had just navigated together, twisting the narrative into one of mutual incompatibility. It wasn't that he had a problem, it was that we had a problem. A convenient fiction that placed equal blame on both of us, neatly sidestepping the inconvenient truth of his betrayal and my subsequent sacrifice. You haven't been happy? I could feel a new emotion rising now, hot and fierce, burning away the shock and hurt. Anger. Righteous, blazing anger. You haven't been happy after I drained my savings to keep you safe? To keep us safe. That was your choice, he said, the words hitting me like stones. I didn't ask you to do that. He didn't ask? He had stood there, trembling, describing threats, looking at me like a drowning man looks at a lifeline. He hadn't used the words, please pay this, but the plea had been loud and clear in his fear, his shame, his dependence. And I had answered it. Out of love. Out of commitment. That was my choice, I echoed softly, the anger sharpening into something cold and dangerous.
Yes, it was.
And now you want to leave. You want to walk away, debt-free, thanks to me, and start over. He didn't respond, but his silence was a confirmation. He was done. Not just with the marriage, but with the inconvenient reminder of who had bailed him out. He wanted a clean slate, wiped clean with my money, and he was confident he could get it. He had already calculated his next move. He wanted half of everything. Half of the assets we had accumulated during the marriage. Half of. My mind raced. The house, the investments, the savings that were left.
And the trust.
The terror returned, different this time. Less about his safety, more about my own. He knew about the $85 million. He knew it existed, that it was my financial bedrock. Would he try to claim it? Could he? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Had I saved him from financial ruin only to face it myself, at his hands? The divorce process began with chilling speed. He had clearly been planning this. He hired a lawyer immediately, an aggressive, sharp-suited woman known for playing hardball. Her initial letters were demands, couched in polite legal language, but demands nonetheless. Disclosure of all assets. Valuation of everything. And the implicit assumption that the marital estate was vast, ripe for division. He was confident, arrogant even. When we had our first meeting with our lawyers present, he wouldn't look at me directly, but I could feel his smugness across the table. He acted as if I was the difficult one, the one dragging things out, the one being unreasonable. His lawyer did most of the talking, laying out their position. They wanted a significant portion of the marital assets. They talked about future earnings, about establishing separate households, about equitable distribution. The $270,000 debt was barely mentioned, dismissed as a premarital issue he had resolved. Resolved because I had paid it. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. He was presenting himself as having cleared his own mess, conveniently omitting the detail that he had used my money to do it, money I had sacrificed from my own reserves. My own lawyer was good, but cautious. He explained the laws, the complexities of asset division. He acknowledged the debt payment was unusual, but stressed that recouping it might be difficult, seen as a marital expense even if incurred through his actions. He was focused on protecting what was left of the joint assets and my remaining personal funds. The $85 million trust was a constant, silent presence in the background. It was mine, legally separate. My lawyer confirmed it was generally protected, as long as marital funds hadn't been commingled or improvements made using marital assets. But the very existence of such a large sum felt like a target. Would they try to pierce the trust? Argue I had relied on it during the marriage, therefore it should be considered? The legal world felt like a minefield. The stress was immense. I couldn't sleep. I lost weight. Simple tasks felt overwhelming. My home, the place I should have felt safest, felt tainted, a battleground. Every object, every shared memory seemed to mock me. I had poured my energy, my emotions, my money into this marriage, into this man, only for him to discard me when it became inconvenient. And now he wanted to take what little I had left. He demanded things in the house that had been mine before the marriage. Sentimental items. He contested valuations, dragged his feet on providing information about his own finances, what was left of them, I assumed, after the gambling and legal fees. He was making it as difficult and painful as possible, perhaps hoping I would just give up, agree to his demands to make it stop. There were days I felt utterly defeated. Days I considered just giving him whatever he wanted, walking away from the house, from the objects, from the memories, just to find peace. The emotional toll was staggering. I felt used, foolish, and deeply, deeply hurt. He had taken my love, my loyalty, my money, and twisted it into a weapon against me. He was counting on me being emotionally spent, on me being too heartbroken to fight. He was counting on the narrative he had constructed. We grew apart. He was painting himself as the victim of an incompatible marriage, not the perpetrator of a calculated betrayal. My lawyer called one afternoon. We needed to prepare for deposition. His lawyer wanted access to everything. Not just finances, but personal history, how the trust was established, my financial philosophy. They were digging, looking for any angle to claim a piece of that $85 million. Sitting in my lawyer's office, surrounded by folders of financial statements and legal documents, I felt a profound sense of clarity cut through the haze of pain. I looked at the figures, the dwindling balance in my non-trust accounts, the value of the house, the remaining investments. And I looked at the documents pertaining to the trust. The trust wasn't just a legal instrument. It was a testament to a part of me that existed independently of any relationship. It was foresight. It was security I had built or been given, separate from the life we had shared. It represented my autonomy.
And he wanted to take it.
After everything. The anger surged again, colder this time, sharper. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about standing up for myself, for the years I had built my own life, for the sacrifice I had made for him, for the principle that you don't get to burn someone's bridge, and then demand toll fare to cross the river. I looked at my lawyer, a quiet determination settling over me. "They're trying to scare me," I said, my voice steady. "They think I'm weak. They think they can bully me into giving him a payout he doesn't deserve, especially not after I paid his debt." My lawyer nodded, listening. "He walked away from this marriage because I paid off his debt," I continued, the realization solidifying. "He saw it as his get-out-of-jail-free card. A way to shed his problems and me in one go. He thinks I'm going to roll over." A cold calm descended. The fear receded, replaced by a steely resolve. I wasn't the heartbroken wife anymore. I was a woman who had been pushed too far. I had saved him from himself, and his reward was trying to ruin me. That would not stand. "I want to fight this," I told my lawyer. "Not just defend. I want him to understand the consequences of his actions. I want him to get exactly what he deserves, and not a penny more." My lawyer looked at me, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He saw the shift, the transformation from victim to combatant. "And the trust?" he asked. "The trust," I said, the words feeling like armor settling into place, "stays mine. Every single cent. It's not marital property. It's my future." And frankly, a dry, bitter humor touched the edge of my voice. After paying off his debt, I need it more than ever. The strategy crystallized. We wouldn't just defend against his claims. We would highlight the truth of the situation. We would demonstrate his recklessness, his reliance on my financial strength, and the timing of his divorce demand immediately after his significant debt was cleared by my separate funds. We would show that far from contributing to the marital estate, he had been a drain on my personal resources, separate from the trust. The courtroom felt sterile, cold. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, unforgiving glow on the polished wood. My husband sat across the room with his lawyer, the same aggressive woman, her posture radiating confidence. He still avoided my gaze, staring straight ahead, a picture of wronged dignity. It was almost comical if it wasn't so deeply infuriating. Our turn came. My lawyer rose, his demeanor quiet, measured, a stark contrast to the bluster from the other side. He didn't launch into an emotional tirade. He just presented facts. He started with the timeline. Our marriage. his alleged business success, the sudden, undisclosed debt. He presented the evidence of the $270,000 gambling debt, bank statements, creditor communications, the desperate pleas for time and payment. He showed how my personal funds, held in accounts separate from any joint marital funds and separate from my trust, had been used, systematically and entirely, to pay off this debt. Line item by line item. $50,000 here, $80,000 there. He detailed the source of these funds, my premarital savings, my career earnings, liquidated investments that were unequivocally mine. He pointed out the dates of the final debt payments, and then the date of my husband's divorce filing. The proximity was undeniable. A matter of weeks. The implication hung heavy in the air. He waited until he was financially clean, thanks to me, before making his move. My husband shifted in his seat. His lawyer whispered something to him, a frown creasing her brow. The smug confidence I had seen earlier was starting to waver. Then my lawyer moved to the assets. He agreed to the division of the actual joint marital assets, the equity in the house, modest, given the mortgage, the small joint savings account, the cars. A fair, equitable split of that. But then he addressed the larger sum, the $85 million. His lawyer, the aggressive one, straightened, ready to pounce, assuming this was where the negotiation, the fight, would begin. She had likely prepared arguments about commingling, about lifestyle supported by these funds, about claiming a share based on the duration of the marriage. My lawyer held up a document. It wasn't thick, but it felt weighty. The trust document. These assets, my lawyer stated calmly, his voice cutting through the courtroom silence, valued at approximately $85 million, are held in an irrevocable trust established for my client years prior to this marriage. He explained the structure, how the trust was managed by independent trustees, how distributions were made solely at their discretion and explicitly for my benefit, not for the marital unit, how the assets were legally protected, not subject to marital division. He then delivered the final precise blow. Furthermore, as we have demonstrated, during the marriage, far from contributing to the accumulation of marital wealth, Mr. Husband's last name, incurred a personal debt of $270,000, a debt that was paid in full using Ms. My last name, as separate, non-marital funds, specifically drawn from accounts outside of the trust. Effectively, Ms. My last name utilized her personal, separate wealth, not marital funds or trust assets, to extinguish Mr. Husband's last name, as significant premarital and marital gambling debt. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Mr. Husband's last name, S. claim for a significant portion of marital assets is modest, as the majority of the wealth associated with Ms. My last name is legally held within this protected trust, my lawyer continued, his voice steady. And his contribution to the marital estate was, in fact, negative $270,000, a deficit covered entirely by Ms. My last name, S. separate resources. Therefore, Ms. My last name proposes an equitable division of the actual marital assets as a standard, with the recognition that her trust assets are not subject to division, and she will not be seeking reimbursement for the $270,000 debt she paid on his behalf from his share of the marital estate, considering the modest value of said estate. My husband's face was a picture. The color drained from it entirely. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in dawning horror. He looked at his lawyer, who looked equally stunned, her confident posture collapsing inward. They had clearly assumed the $85 million was fair game, or at least a strong point of negotiation. They had likely advised him he would walk away with a significant payout, enough to comfortably start his new debt-free life. But he wasn't getting half of $85 million. He wasn't even getting half of the reduced assets after I paid his debt. He was getting half of the actual joint marital assets, which, compared to the number he was expecting, was peanuts. And he wasn't getting anything back for the $270,000 I covered. He had effectively gambled his marriage and his financial future and lost spectacularly. The air was thick with his shock. His lawyer scrambled, whispering furiously to him, flipping through documents, her face tight with contained panic. She hadn't anticipated this counter-narrative, this precise demonstration of his liability and my protection. The trust wasn't just a detail, it was the entire game changer, one they had clearly underestimated or hoped to challenge and failed. There was no dramatic courtroom explosion from him, just a slow, visible deflation. The judge, a wise, elderly woman who had seen it all, listened patiently. The arguments from his side became hesitant, less aggressive. Their foundation had crumbled. They had banked on the big number, the $85 million, and it was untouchable. The divorce was finalized shortly after. The terms were essentially what my lawyer had proposed: a division of the modest marital assets. No claim on the trust. No reimbursement for the $270,000 debt I had paid. He walked away with his share of the house equity, minus the mortgage, his car, and a small amount from the joint savings. A pittance compared to the sum he had envisioned. A pittance compared to the debt I had cleared for him. Leaving the courthouse, the air outside felt different.
Clean. Sharp.
He was nowhere in sight. He left quickly, presumably wanting to avoid any further encounter. There was no triumph, not the kind that makes you want to cheer. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. And a cold, quiet satisfaction. He had tried to betray me, to use me, to discard me and take my security. But my security had been built on a foundation he didn't understand, guarded by walls he couldn't breach. The trust wasn't just money. It was foresight, independence, a silent declaration that I was in control of my own destiny. The $85 million wasn't just a number in an account. It was the solid ground beneath my feet after the earthquake. It represented freedom from ever being in that position again, from ever needing to rely on someone else's shaky ground, from ever being vulnerable to someone else's recklessness and betrayal. I went back to my house. It felt quieter now, but the oppressive weight was gone. It was just a house again, not a battleground. I walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects that were now unequivocally mine. The garden outside looked peaceful. The space where the fountain was supposed to be was just an empty patch of earth, waiting for something new. Rebuilding wasn't easy. The emotional scars were deep. Trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered. The cynicism creeps in around the edges. But beneath that, there is a strength I rediscovered, forged in the fire of that betrayal. I had faced down fear, manipulation, and attempted financial ruin, and I had emerged standing, not just surviving, but secure. The $270,000 was a harsh lesson, a painful, expensive tuition in human nature. But the $85 million was my vindication. It was the quiet power that allowed me to say no, to stand firm, to refuse to be a victim. He had wanted to take everything, to leave me exposed, but in the end, his greed and short-sightedness had cost him dearly, leaving him with almost nothing, while my carefully guarded independence remained, stronger than ever. The greatest security isn't in shared assets, it's in the ground you built for yourself, the ground no one else can take away. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever had to fight for what's yours, or had your trust broken in the deepest way, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps bring more of these stories to life. Thanks for being here.